Hello everyone. Up to now, we have learned how demand and supply curves work. Today, we will go one step further and analyze how changes in the real world, such as weather, technology, or consumer behavior, affect markets. This is, this is a very important skill because economics is not just theory. It is a tool to understand what is happening around us. Before we begin, let's quickly review the key concepts. First, we use the ceteris paribus assumption, which means we hold everything else constant while analyzing one change at a time. Second, we need to remember the factors that shift demand, such as income, population, tastes, substitutes, and complement. Third, we also, consider the factors that shift supply, including natural condition, input prices, technology, and government policies. These concepts will guide our analysis in each example. To analyze any economic event, we follow a structural, four-step process. First, we draw the initial demand and supply diagram before the change occurs. Second, we determine whether the event affects demand or supply. Third, we decide whether the curve shifts to the right or to the left, and that we redraw the diagram. Finally, we identify the new equilibrium and compare it with the original equilibrium in terms of price and quantity. If you follow these four steps carefully, you can analyze almost any market situation. Let's look at our first example. During the summer of 2015, the weather conditions were excellent for commercial salmon fish of the California coast. There was heavy rain and cooler ocean temperatures, which helped salmon breeding and increased the food supply. Before analyzing the fact, we start with the initial equilibrium, point E0 with price P0 and quantity Q0. Now let's apply our four-step process. This event affects supply because it improves production conditions. Since the conditions are favorable, supply increases, which means the supply curve shifts to the right from S0 to S1. As a result, a new equilibrium E1 is formed. At this new equilibrium, the price decreases from P0 to P1 and the quantity increases from Q0 to Q1. So the key takeaway is increasing supply leads to lower price and higher quantity. Now let's move to the second example. Over time, especially among younger generations, people have shifted from traditional newspapers to digital sources, such as smartphones and tablets. This is a change in consumer preference. We begin again with the initial equilibrium at E zeros. This change affects demand, not supply. Because people prefer digital news, demand for printed newspapers decreases. So the demand curve shifts to the left from D0 to D1. As a result, the new equilibrium shows both lower price and lower quantity. So the key takeaway is decrease in demand leads to lower price and lower quantity. Okay, now let's consider a more complex example. The US Postal Service is facing two challenges. First, wages for postal workers have increased due to inflation. This increases input costs, which affects supply. Higher input costs cause the supply curve to shift to the left from S0 to S1. This represents a decrease in supply. Second, people are increasingly using email, texting, and social media instead of traditional mail. This is a change in preferences, which affects demand. As a result, the demand curve shifts to the left from D0 to D1. So in this example, both supply and demand decreases at the same time. Now let's combine both effects. When both the demand and supply decreases, the result becomes less predictable. We can clearly say that quantity decreases from Q0 to Q1. However, the effect on price is uncertain. Price could increase, decrease, or remain roughly the same, depending on which shift is stronger. In this case, the slide suggests that the price remains around P0. The most important point here is when both curves shift at the same time, we must carefully analyze each effect before drawing conclusions. Thank you for your attention.